Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to this new meeting of the Cañada Blanc Center here at the LSE, in which we are going to be discussing human capital. My name is Andrés Rodríguez Pose. Most of you know me. I am the director of the Cañada Blanc Center and the Princesa Asturias here at the LSE. And for me, it's a great privilege to introduce Joana Silva. And Joana Silva, who is the Deputy Chief Economist for People Vertical at the World Bank Group. And she's here for many reasons, apart from her position, the idea that she has, with her team, actually put together a World Bank report that discusses the brand new Human Capital report and the Human Capital Index Plus, with the emphasis on the report's policy implications and its analysis of human capital accumulation today and in the future. The way we are going to play this is Joana is going to give a presentation for about 40 minutes, and then there are going to be questions and answers. I know how talkative you are, how interested you are in all these issues, how much you have been challenging me about the role of human capital, institutions, innovation, and I think this is the moment to actually challenge the real practitioners, the people that are shaping the world in this respect. Just a few words about Joana. Joana is the Deputy Chief Economist for People Vertical at the World Bank Group, where she has led multiple World Bank operations and published reports. She is also an associate professor at the Católica University in Lisbon at the Business School, and she is specialized in applied economics, labor economics, international economics, development economics, and public economics. So all types that you are interested in. So that's this is a person to actually talk. And if you don't like what she says, you can always talk to Rafael, who's over there, also from the World Bank. And Joana has a PhD in economics from the University of Nottingham. Did you by any chance meet Tobias Ketterer there?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a coincidence. Because Tobias Ketterer is a very good friend of mine, former student at the College of Europe and former co-author.
Wonderful.
Okay, without further ado, Joana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Andres, and thank you all for coming. I know it's late, and I really appreciate you being here. So I'm going to talk to you about our new Human Capital report. In our unit, we every second year we have a higher tier publication where we kind of try to change the minds of people in one dimension, and let's see if I change yours. So the title of the report is Building Human Capital Where It Matters: Homes, Neighborhoods, and Workplaces. So it already hints that we should shift something, change something in our mindset. Let's see what we are arguing.
I think we have to press the end of that. Let's press the screen, and now it should work. Or maybe it's, yeah. Moving on.
Maybe it's...
Or maybe I didn't.
It was off. Yeah. Economies. So we started this report looking at trends on human capital. Human capital, as you know, is health, education, and skills. So we started by looking at global trends on each of these angles, these dimensions. First, we looked at human capital in health. What was the trend in the last 15 years in terms of health? And what we found was concerning. Here in this graph, you have the average adult height for an adult born in 1966 versus the average adult height of an adult born in 1996. And if they were the same height across cohorts, countries would be in the diagonal. But what you see is that many countries are actually below the line, meaning that the average adult stature, which is an indicator of overall health, has been falling in many countries, and many of those are actually in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is a reason for concern. Then we looked at education, and one key outcome in education is learning. So we looked at test scores of students, and we look at those for 2010 and for 2025. Again, if learning was the same, had been at the same level in both years, you'd have countries in the diagonal. What you see is that you have a lot of red dots below the diagonal. And these are lower and lower middle income countries. In these countries, you saw declines in learning outcomes during the last 15 years. Let's now look at skills. Let's look at on-the-job learning, what you learn as you work. When you look at potential experience and how your wages progresses, reflecting productivity and learning as you gain more experience, and you compare the United States with, say, Brazil and India, we did this for many other countries, what you see? You see that these curves are inside the US curve. This means that the same additional year of experience leads to much less learning, human capital accumulation in this country. So 1/3 as much human capital is accumulated at work in India than in the US, for example. If we look at female labor force participation, and this is important because to the extent that the workplace is a place where you gain skills, that you gain skills as you work, it's important that you work. And what you see around the world is that male labor force participation has been high and constant throughout the last 15 years, whereas female labor force participation in low and lower middle income countries has been, at about 51% for a very long time. So this means that half of the women are not participating in the labor force in low and lower middle income countries, and therefore not accumulating skills. So this kind of panorama was concerning. And the big headline number was the following. In 2/3 of the low and middle income countries, there was stagnation or reversal in at least one of these dimensions. So this is not something that is niche. This was something that happened in many countries where either education outcomes, health outcomes, or skills have become worse, the core outcomes. So this was a reason for concern. So in addition to looking at the trends, we developed what we call the Human Capital Index Plus. It's a global index. We had already the Human Capital Index. And the plus comes from the fact that, before we were looking at human capital accumulation just until the age of 18, as you finish school, and then it was just utilization of this human capital. In the Human Capital Plus, you consider the accumulation of human capital throughout your life cycle as you work as well. And we look at differences across countries. If you put your phone towards that QR code, you'll see that you can put the name of your country of choice and can compare this country to any other that you want. And you can compare it in these 3 dimensions. This is a synthetic measure that has kind of the core indicators in health, education, and employment. In health, we had to choose indicators that were available for most countries in the world. And we chose 2, adult survival and the fraction of children not stunted. In terms of education, we consider expected years of schooling completed between 5 and 18, harmonized learning scores, and tertiary completion rate. This was something that we didn't have before. Our previous measure was ending at 18. And in employment, we consider whether you participate or not and the quality of your job. So using these measures and using the literature in economics to see how they translate into productivity, we came up with a formula that gives the level of human capital of different countries. This is what you are expected to acquire in terms of your human capital in a country throughout your life cycle, given the existing conditions of health, education, and employment. It kind of shows you where you are vis-a-vis the potential. And we have kind of a simulation tool where you can compare 2 countries and see where the gap vis-a-vis the other country lies. Is it more in health, in education, or is it more in employment? And you can also simulate if each of these indicators is brought to the level of the other country. How much you gain in terms of labor earnings as a country, and links through this through productivity and jobs. So looking at this indicator, what we saw for the world is that people today have because of the conditions that exist in health, education, and employment, they leave on the table about 50% of their labor earnings potential. So they could make much more earnings potential. They could have much more earnings as they grow adult, and they leave it on the table because of the existing conditions of health, education, and employment. So this is again a call for action. So because of the trends being disappointing and because of what the current situation is costing countries, we needed to think about this differently. And what thinking about it differently meant for us. At the World Bank and in public policy in countries, when you think about education and health, you normally think about improving schools and health clinics, health services. What we are saying here is to improve the outcomes that are the core outcomes of education, health, and employment, you need to think beyond that. You need to complement that thinking and understand that much of your human capital is built in homes, neighborhoods, and workplace. And in the rest of the talk, I'll go through each of these settings and answer two questions. First, why is this setting important for human capital accumulation? And second, what can be done about it using the evidence that exists in the literature about the programs that work. So let's do homes first. If you think about how your human capital was built, I'm sure that homes comes to mind. When you are very little, in our early childhood, nutrition, early simulation, learning, and hygiene is often decided at home by your parents. Even if when you reach school age, your parents often decide whether you go to school and for how long. And even as adults, many of these decisions are done at the household level of who works where and even whether you migrate or not. So homes are important throughout the life cycle. What is very interesting in these graphs and these analyses, and I want to point just something, all the graphs that I show you today, they are fully replicable, and we've published the replication package that you can go from the raw data to the graph. And the second thing is that in addition to the report, we publish data stories, but also interactive graphs. So you can go and pick the country of your choice, and we'll give you the same graphs as I put here, but for the country of your choice. What do I want to emphasize with these graphs? So here I have two countries, Peru and Vietnam. And what is in the y-axis is the child's ranking of vocabulary in the graphs on the right. And on the graphs on the left, child's ranking of mathematics, the percentile where the child is. And here you have the child's age. What you see is by the age of 5, comparing children whose mother's educational attainment is primary or less with children whose mothers have some secondary education or more, you see already a big gap. At this point in most developing countries, they still didn't go to school in general. Most of the environment that shaped their human capital was home. What was striking was this big difference to start with, but also the fact that it remains constant as they age, as they then go to school and have access to school. Is not that this difference shrinks. In most countries, it remains almost constant. So home shape your human capital, and this is kind of one example. Then the second question that we ask in homes is that, why is that? Is it because they lack resources, or are there other factors? And we did this interesting research on China. So in China, what happens is that, as in many other countries, people have to migrate. Parents often have to migrate. And when they migrate, they leave the children at the care of grandparents or other relatives. And then we have three types of situation. We have the baseline is children who are with their parents, who are never left behind. But then we have children who are chronically left behind. So they were left behind several years ago and they are still left behind. Children who are at present left behind, and children who are in the past left behind, but now the parents are back home. What you see, and is kind of expected when you have a migration flow, you see that income, annual household income, is higher for children whose parents migrated than for children who were never left behind. But what you see as well for those children is that scores in mathematics, scores in vocabulary are worse, and the probability of even reporting depression is higher. So they have more resources, but they are lagging in many outcomes in education and even in depression. So what we can see with this example is that resources do not compensate for care. Is resources plus care. The care environment that you have at home shapes your human capital beyond the resources that your family has. If we believe this, what could we learn for public policy? How can we widen the menu of policies that we offer? Cash transfer programs and job programs are very important. They provide income, they provide jobs for the poor. And these are important angles of homes that have good hygiene, good nutrition. But what we are also arguing in this report is that parenting programs and preschool that actively act on the care are also very important. Resources alone won't do it. You need these additional types of programs. What do I mean? In parenting programs, we have, for example, the example of Jamaica, where the program was implemented at scale, and it led to improvements in cognitive, language, motor, and social emotional skills. And this evidence from Jamaica was also saw in many randomized controlled trials, so robust evidence in many other countries. Another way to provide scalable alternatives to care environments is childcare. And around the world, preschool programs have been shown to increase cognitive and social emotional skills during pre-primary period, and these effects to persist beyond the primary school and even in university, and even the probability of committing crimes. So very long-lasting positive effects on children. The counterfactual is always the care that so the environment that you would be exposed at home. But quality childcare showing good results in many countries, and in the short term, but also in the long term. And this leads me to the setting where you have probably most interest: neighborhoods. Remember, the outcomes of interest for me are human development outcomes, are learning, health. And what I'm saying is that the neighborhood is key for these outcomes. So why would neighborhoods matter? When you think about your neighborhood, you think about the access to the education and health facilities that you have nearby. But the neighborhoods go beyond that. When you are in a certain neighborhood, you are exposed to environmental factors. You are exposed to the level of pollution. And this is normally neighborhood level. It's not just your house. You are also exposed to social dynamics, to gangs, to peers that promote you or that harm you in terms of your human capital formation. And you are also exposed to a certain local economy that can have better or worse jobs. These will affect your human capital. How did we do this kind of proof of that this setting matters in a causal way? We use data for Brazil. Brazil has extremely good data. You can trace people wherever they went for about 30 years. You have that data linked with all the health and education outcomes, even with crime. So what is shown here, the exercise is to think about a low-income child growing in a low-income neighborhood and know that that child will eventually earn half as much as a low-income child growing up in a high-income neighborhood. So think about two low-income children, observationally similar, one that grows up in a low-income neighborhood and another one that grows up in Brazil in a high-income neighborhood. What you see then as adults is that the one who grew up in the high-income neighborhood, so this one here, that were neighborhood with low share of low-income parents, earned almost twice as much. They were identical in terms of their home conditions, or at least the observables. And the way we tease this out is through people who moved out of this neighborhood. So it's causal. This is future income, but we saw this effect also in years of schooling and in the probability of earning more than your parents. So this is kind of something that, makes us think that there's more to the neighborhood than we normally put weight on in terms of public policy when we think about education and health outcomes. And the first reason I said is that the school and health clinics in your neighborhood are important. But for them to be important for your human capital, we needed kind of this piece of evidence, which is very interesting. It's like the time travel to school and to health facilities around the world. And around the world, the time travel to school is about 18 minutes, and the average. And the time travel to health facilities is about 34 minutes. So you do use the health facilities and the school in your neighborhood. Their quality will matter for you. What is also interesting is this paper from a very known and interesting author, and that it discusses kind of something which is a very powerful evidence, because it's kind of a shock that was completely exogenous to El Salvador. What happened was, this is the map of El Salvador. At some point, the US decided to deport gang members who were arrested in the US back to El Salvador. When they were deported, they went to El Salvador and conglomerated in the same way as they were. So when S13, 18th Street, they kind of stayed to where they were, just because there were natural barriers. So we can compare the outcomes using the distance to the nearest gang territory boundary. And what you see is that places that are more distant have a much higher probability of graduating after 10 years of gang control than places that were near a gang-controlled area.
And just one question, is that just for boys or for boys and girls?
This is for boys and girls, yes.
Boys and girls.
Yeah. So it's kind of, for us from an education perspective, to reverse this gap, it will take us a lot in schools and health clinics. It's really a shock with a large impact, and this geographical, micro-geographical dimension is really important in this case in determining the impacts of this shock. So what does this mean for policy, for us at the World Bank and for countries in general? So if the local skills and clinics matter so much, and we have struggling neighborhoods where they are really lagging, we should worry about those. And we should improve public schools in these neighborhoods and public health clinics. Public services, the quality that is offered there will determine a lot. But we should think beyond that. Let me give you another example. When we were doing this report, we consulted with a lot of governments around the world, because we really wanted the message to resonate with people. And I was in Brazil, and we were speaking with the Secretary of Education in Rio. And she was telling us something that I think is an example that kind of shows the importance of neighborhoods. She was telling us, I'm the Secretary of Education, my goal is to improve life. But what happens in Brazil, and it happens in other places, but she was telling about her own case, is that for admission to university, you have one day where you have the exam. And so a student to go to university has to go to this exam. If in that day there are police rallies, legitimate because, to fight crime, there will be shootings in the favela, and the kids will not be able to make it to the exam place. These kids will not go to university. So she was saying, no matter how well I do in my schools, even if they are in pristine order, if in that day you have that situation, you will not improve the learning outcomes to university for these students. So sometimes the improving learning has to be a shared goal between me and unlikely partners, such as this internal defense coordination with them. Similarly, if you believe that pollution, and there's a lot of evidence in economics of, factories going to one place and the people around them having worse health and education outcomes. You also need to coordinate with sectors such as the environment. If you believe that the violence is one of your biggest issues, you have to coordinate with other partners. If you believe in the importance of urban upgrading, you have to coordinate with them. These are unlikely partners for us. Even in our own portfolio at the World Bank, we have very few projects of these sectors that have human development outcomes as their indicator of success. If I do, I will no longer have schools, roads to nowhere. Because if I want to build a road that goes to the school because I want to improve enrollment in school, then I trace that. So this is very important, a very important policy implication that we are emphasizing in this report. The importance of sharing human development goals and designing projects with that angle, with not just health, education, and employment, but also sectors such as urban upgrading, infrastructure, even internal defense. And here is an example of the neighborhood effect. Because, in neighborhoods, that's the third point that I want to make is that, because of the externalities and the need for, common action from the whole neighborhood, in addition to this, I need to incentivize collective action in some cases, say sanitation. If just one person changes sanitation, I won't have the outcome in health that I want. Everybody needs to act in sanitation at the same time for me to have that outcome. So uptake at the community level, at the neighborhood level is also very important. And this leads us to the third and final step, workplaces. So here, the idea is that your human capital formation doesn't end at school. It continues in workplaces. The number is quite important. It's like you build half of your human capital in school, half of your human capital in work. How come? Did we mess up the calculation? No. The thing is, in economics, as a rule of thumb, each additional year of schooling brings you about 10% higher earnings. Each additional year of experience, we have computed for the world, brings you about 2.5% premium in earnings. The thing is, you work many more years. So the skills that you acquire as you work, and many of you are in innovation and digital masters. So what happens in terms of innovation, digital skills is not like an afterthought for your human capital formation. It's really important. But if we believe this, we need to think about it in the following way. I told you the number of women that were not working. To the extent that accumulating human capital at work is so important for the total human capital that you have, first thing is that you need to work. You need to be employed. What I'm saying here is not all women should work. There are women that, don't want to work for some legitimate reason. What I'm saying is that for those who want to work, they should be able to do it. What we have here in this first part of being employed, what we found for the world is that 1 in 5 youths are neither working nor studying. From this human capital perspective, they are not accumulating human capital. And this is kind of a waste of their potential. And 50% of women are not in the labor force. This is a large share of our population that, is not accumulating skills at work. Should we do it at the end, the questions, or?
It's about the youth specifically. Is that like people 18 and under? Is that what qualifies as youth?
Youth is 18 to 25, I think. The second thing is that if learning at work is so important, it's really important where you work, the type of work that you have. What do we mean? We took data from all the labor force surveys around the world, and I did this graph, which I think is quite interesting. So the bar on the top is low and middle income countries. The bar on the bottom is high income countries. In labor force surveys, you know the job, the occupation of the person. So we coded the share of people that were in one of these three types of jobs. Micro firm with a maximum of 5 workers, farmer in a very small scale, small size, working with small size plots, or low quality self-employment, kind of is not the lawyers and the medical doctors, but kind of people more in street vendors, etc. The occupations that were more of the stuff. What we do find that is striking? 70% of the people who are employed in low and middle income countries are in these low learning jobs. Whereas the same percentage in high income countries is 20%. It's almost reversed. Why do we say these are low learning jobs? What we did was the returns to experience comparing self-employed workers with wage workers. And we have this graph for all the countries in the world almost. And what you see here is that the same gain in experience gives you about half in learning if you are self-employed versus when you are a wage worker, given the jobs that self-employed. And the final way to improve what you learn at work is to move to a new job with a stronger potential of learning. But for this, I need these jobs to exist. And this is another important angle that we need to tackle. You might think, well, Joana, this that you show me on the comparison between returns to experience for self-employed and wage workers, it's in the cross-section, so you're kind of taking a picture at one point in time, and people might have been self-employed in the past or wage workers in the past. So what we did was taking panel data for, say, here we have India and China, and see spells of self-employment and spells of wage employment. And the conclusion was the same. One additional year as self-employed brings you about half in low and low middle income countries learning as you do as wage workers. So what can be done? The first angle was, being employed for those who want to be employed. For youth, what the evidence shows is that job matching and apprenticeships are extremely important. For women, childcare and safe commutes to work. Here I have 2 examples. This is evaluated with randomized control trials with very large scale programs, in this case of apprenticeships. So here is the example from Côte d'Ivoire. In Africa, a large share of youth are in informal apprenticeship. The idea is that sometimes the education system doesn't give you the skills that you need to succeed in the labor market. And the way to learn, to catch up, is to pair you with a carpenter or someone who is doing already the job and learn from them. But this is kind of done informally. Your parents know someone and then you're placed. What they did in this program is that they formalized this process. They start being paid, apprentice work paid. There was a pool of vacancies that firms had to apply and put forward. And what happened was that, those who received the apprenticeship, the treated group, they improved their earnings, but they also improved their skills. They could kind of show that not only they improved their income, but also their skills through the apprenticeship. For women, the economic rationale is kind of strong for removing barriers to female labor force participation. See this number. Removing barriers to women's entrepreneurship could double female labor force participation. And this would mean increasing India's GDP by 43%. You can debate the number. India has a particularly lower than average for their level of income participation, labor force participation of women. You could debate the number, but the number is clearly high. It's as if in each year you're throwing a large part of your GDP to the sea because you don't eliminate barriers for female labor force participation. And some of these barriers will also help in homes. Childcare, quality childcare will not only improve female labor force participation, but will also, if it is of quality, improve children's well-being and human capital. Then you have the programs that are more geared at improving the skills that you gain while you are in the current jobs. So we saw that given the structure of the jobs, many people were in low learning jobs. What should we do? Let's improve the learning in the jobs that exist. What do we mean by this? What is being happening right now in development is to form, in many cases, this type of programs that, help in your soft skills. So this is a program that was building skills at work in India, a program that was helping people improve their skills in communication, problem solving, and stress management. What these randomized control trials show was that improved the ones who benefited from this intervention became more productive, about 13%. What was also interesting is that those who were not beneficiaries directly of the program, but they work with them, their co-workers, they improve their productivity as well by 12%. This is because when you learn at work, you learn in a different way. You learn from peers and managers, you learn from practice, and you learn from technology. So this kind of led to positive effects even beyond the treated workers. Another way to promote learning at work is through technology adoption. Digital tools can reduce the cost and complexity of finding information and managing workflows within the firm. One of the biggest problems that we have right now, or kind of the biggest potential that we are not fulfilling completely, is, say, with artificial intelligence. We have a lot of adoption, but we are still not being able to translate it into the gains of productivity that we aspire to. And one of the key reasons is that you need to change your organization from within. And to change that organization, digital tools are essential. But these digital tools need to be, something that workers use and master. So you need people to gain these digital skills, and not, it's kind of the skilling, the upskilling. We normally think about it as something that is essential for firms to work in terms of, there is demand for the skills. You need to have the skills that the market demand, so we improve in productivity. Here, even the way you skill people, the skill sector itself is changing a lot with these digital tools, and we should leverage that for improving learning in current jobs. And finally, you have this idea that you need to improve current jobs, but also think about the future where there are more of these high learning jobs. And here, what we are kind of emphasizing is a virtuous circle. The idea that, when you have more human capital, you will have better firms. The idea is the following. Think about the firm that wants to grow. As a firm wants to grow, normally you cannot just have the frontline work. You need, for more complex tasks, engineers, people who work in marketing, etc. So you need the skills to exist in the market. So the distribution within a country of skills, and you can increase it, say, through expansion of trainings or expansion of universities, is essential for firms to grow. And with that growth, you'll have more labor demand, and therefore higher returns to skill, and therefore more people investing in skills, and the virtual circles can appear. So this idea of the structural change more long run is also extremely important. So all of this is kind of the policies for each setting. Now, to end, we kind of went a step back and said, beyond the policies of each setting, there are certain challenges in human development that need an integrated approach. And I'm going to give you the example of nutrition, fighting malnutrition. Think about what needs to happen in homes, neighborhoods, and workplaces in an integrated way to fight malnutrition. If I'm serious about fighting malnutrition, an indicator that well, there are improvements, but there is some reasons for concern. At home, parents need to provide a healthy diet, early stimulation, adequate sanitation and hygiene. In neighborhoods, a transport network must deliver affordable, healthy foods and healthy healthcare systems and monitor children growth, and public utilities such as clean water must exist. And in workplaces, is where you raise the money to then afford these healthy foods and nutritious foods. So to fight malnutrition, I don't just need policies in each of these settings, but I need, this integrated approach throughout these settings. And this is what brought success. Here is the example of Indonesian Peru, where they combine really this long-term commitment of the government in reducing malnutrition with activities that are, maternal and child health services, nutrition counseling, action in water, sanitation, hygiene services, social protection, so income, and early childhood education. So it's kind of all of these actions at the same time, coordinated at the local level, were what really made the miracle of, large-scale reductions in malnutrition. So kind of this makes us reflect on the importance of each setting, but then these integrated approaches to get at some outcomes such as skill development or malnutrition. But then you might find it too complicated. You're saying, okay, so I need to do all these extra policies, and in addition, how am I going to implement all these? There are tools that can help you. One example is the social registry. Countries like Turkey, Brazil, but many others have a registry of the poor and vulnerable in the country, kind of a list, a data set that has the poor and vulnerable in the country, their characteristics. And what they can do is that all the social programs, from childcare to income support to subsidies to utilities, they are all targeted to training, they are all targeted using that data set. So you can layer different programs using those tools. Well, what we also need, and we have huge gaps on, is the data agenda. We need to be better in tracing inputs and outcomes. So I need to know children's books at home, and I also need to know their reading proficiency. I need to know in neighborhood the percentage of people exposed to hazard air quality, and then I need to know the mortality rates. I need to know in firms the share of people exposed to on-the-job learning, and then I want to know productivity, labor productivity. And this is an agenda where we still lag behind. If I do a map to you where I kind of put the color on the countries that are already collecting this data, you see that you have a lot of emptiness. And this is an agenda that is long run and is very important. So all in all, a panorama where we have an evolution that kind of leaves us concerned, where 2/3 of the countries have stagnations or reversals in at least one of these dimensions. A call for a different approach to human capital, to improve human capital investments and outcomes, thinking beyond the school and the health facilities, acknowledging their importance, but asking you to think about homes, neighborhoods, and workplaces, thinking about the policies in each of these settings, and the need for victories in some outcomes of action in all of them, and tracing success through data, and then the human capital index and other measures where you can see whether you are progressing in the right direction, and then impact evaluations and other studies that show you whether your extra euro or pound is having an impact. Thank you very much.
Yeah, take a seat. You have you raised a lot of issues and critical thoughts. What is important to know is how individual outcomes and individual human capital matters for places, how it allows those places to grow, but how the conditions of those places actually favor or deter development of human capital. You've seen a lot of how on this raw homes, places, and workplaces actually make a difference for performance of individuals and the livelihoods of individuals. I think there's a lot of food for thought because there's a lot of policy implications, and we are interested in policies. So, who wants to break the ice? Yes, Carla, please go ahead.
So
And remember one thing: you're being recorded. So, well, yes. Get the microphone there. I've been telling you speak loud and clear. So, yeah.
So I'm very curious. Oh, okay.
Say who you are.
Oh, I'm Carla, and I'm doing a master's in environment and development. I'm taking Andres' class on regional development policy. And I'm curious because I actually did my bachelor dissertation like 3 years ago on family background aspects and how they relate to student test scores with PISA data. And what I investigated back then was also things that I think will affect directly the neighbor effect that you are mentioning. So doesn't this neighbor effect, is it not influenced by other aspects such as, for example, wealth, the education of parents, and for example, immigration, like the fact that certain immigrants will be in a concrete neighborhood and that also affect the results and yeah, how much they will earn in the future? Thank you.
I
Should
think
we
it,
collect the 2 or 3?
well, let's start now. How many hands do we have? All right, so let's do 2 by 2. So Juan Pedro, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm Juan Pedro from the Local Economic Development Program. So one question that I have is there data about if a neighborhood which was recently urbanly renovated or upgraded against no, my question is this data that you gave about the influence of being surrounded by people which are wealthier, if you come from a lower background, was that in new areas of the city that were developed, or how was those people who were poor introduced into those neighbors? Like, how was that information given? Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So to Carla's question, here we wanted to kind of disentangle the effect of homes, of the social economic conditions, from the effect of the place itself. So for that reason, we were comparing children from that were growing up in parents with similar social economic conditions, but in a neighborhood where the conditions of the neighborhood were different. So that was kind of the exercise. Alachetti, for example, in the US, the way they see it, they use migration. So the idea is that they use people that change to establish causality. They use people who change places at different moments in their life, and then they can tease out the causal effect of neighborhoods. Because here the concern is that you could have these effects simply because of sorting, because wealthier people sort themselves into wealthier neighborhoods. So here the exercise is really to get at the impact of the place beyond the impact of the social economic characteristics. So it's kind of, in our world, we say 2 children from a similar background, but establish how wealthy the neighborhood is, for example, the share of poor people, the share of poor households. Just because in Brazil we have that information exists, but it's just the way to tease out causality. To the question of Juan Pablo, so these are not new areas of the city. This is kind of using And there was no change, no program that was implemented to get this data. It's just in Brazil, administrative records allow you to trace people for about 30 years as their life continues wherever they are. So here is taking Brazil as is and seeing and establishing, a measure of how wealthy a neighborhood is in different points in times, but kind of keeping that stable. You're seeing kind of the effect of you growing up in a wealthy neighborhood versus a non-wealthy neighborhood. The other paper that I showed on the gangs, for example, is more a neighborhood with a lot of pollution or a lot of violence versus a neighborhood with less violence. You could do the same exercise for, a neighborhood that is close to a very polluting factory or not. But here the idea is that the microgeography where these problems are concentrated affects your outcomes in terms of learning, in terms of health.
Kathleen, please.
Sorry. Thank you. My name is Kathleen, and I'm on the Local Economic Development Master's Program. It is my understanding that a lot of nations are currently militarizing, and you noted that there are negative impacts on human capital from surrounding violence. Is there going to be, if countries go to war, are there decreases in human capital? And if that's the case on a large scale, how do we mitigate that?
There is a large, yes. There is a large, well-established literature in economics that shows you that conflict wars have a lot of effects on human development, starting from that. So it's kind of the ultimate destruction of human capital, but also, because they destroy some public services and they destroy access to those public services, you will have worse human development outcomes. There are papers that link war with stunting, for example, and not just because you have your parents saw their source of income being destroyed, but also because you went less to the health facility, the access to the markets was harder. So it's important both the income, but also the access to health and education services and to markets. So in both accounts, definitely wars are a source of human capital destruction. This is very well distributed, established in the literature. And the way the literature establishes that is like this: they see places with different incidents of violence, and then they compare, outcomes in these places that were similar a priori, but in some you have more incidents of violence, more attacks or violence, people who suffer violence, self-reported, that allows you to make this statement quite clearly.
Maxine, please.
Hi, my name is Maxine. I have a question about the statistic on 1 in 5 women or youth are not working in India or studying. I'm just wondering what your opinion on, because I think a lot of women play a lot of huge roles in social connections, and you talk a lot about how neighborhood networks make a huge impact on these human capital outcomes. So I'm wondering, for these women who aren't working or studying, could they potentially have impacts on building social networks that could then lead to better human capital progress for kind of the other part, or for their children or their siblings or the men in their household that work, for example?
So here in the report, because we are looking at how human capital is accumulated, we are kind of emphasizing the role of work as a source of human capital accumulation. You are emphasizing the role of social networks, which are important as well. But here in our logic is like, what is the learning that 1 year in the job gives you? And this learning comes from, the practice. A nurse, as she does more of the same treatment, she becomes better at it, the technology or your peers and managers. So here in this in this logic, the networks that we kind of have in mind is more like networks within firms, in teams. But what you're kind of saying is that even in neighborhoods, there are many networks that are extremely important for children and for sensitizing, and that's very, very true. And that's kind of something that we are, when I say in neighborhoods that we need collective action is something that you have mobilized people for. So these social networks are very important. In childcare, there are more traditional and less traditional ways of doing childcare. Many times in neighborhoods, it kind of is the village who takes care of the child. So definitely these social networks, the mobilization they bring, the accountability they bring, for policymakers, whether they are doing the things or not, are extremely important when we think that the unit of interest is not your house, but is your neighborhood. So absolutely, that's very important. And activating these networks means sometimes going beyond the usual suspect. Sometimes you have to motivate the community leaders or the men, even if your interest is in changing perceptions on women working, for example. I'm going to give you an example of a paper that studied Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, they kind of first assessed the perceptions of men on whether they thought their neighbors were against the women's working. And they said a very high percentage. They were thinking that most of their neighbors didn't agree with this. And then they shocked them with information that actually, no, your neighbors are much more pro women working than not. And then what you saw as effect was that many more women registered in this job search app. This is a paper published in the American Economic Review. So what I want to say with this is that the norms, the social norms, the culture is very important, and sometimes is something that is kind of deterring women from participating in labor markets. But I think the message from the literature is you can change the social norms, but you have to do it in a smart way using the networks, but also using information shocks and leading by example. In another paper, what they do is a garment factory, and they had 0 supervisors as women. And then they kind of forced that, and they established a certain share of women that become supervisors. And at the end, productivity increases, and the men like it so much that then they are pro the women supervisors. So sometimes you need to change minds in neighborhoods, in workplaces, to shift these cultural norms towards more participation of women, which is important for many things, but also for this human capital accumulation.
Next question, Alex, please.
Hi, Joana. My name is Alex. I'm also on the local economic development program. My question for you is about there was one statistic you showed us about where you stripped out lawyers and doctors to be self-employed in high-income countries and low-income countries. And I wanted to ask you why exactly did you do that? And if there was sort of like a gray area between these perhaps more elite professions and like street vendors. And I wanted to understand and also I wonder if it is a self-employed lawyer, if it is self-employed doctor, if they are not self-employed, if they are employed, do they actually increase productivity? Do they learn something by being not self-employed?
Thank you, Alex, for your question. So we use occupation. So in that sense, you knew who were the lawyers, you knew who were the street vendors. I kind of went to the extremes to kind of make you visualize what that was meaning by low quality or high quality in terms of learning. I'm not saying that all jobs are bad. I'm saying in terms of what you learn your scope for increasing your productivity as you work in those jobs, there are differences vis-a-vis wage workers. So we saw averages. What we say is that when you look at occupations of self-employed, most self-employed in low and lower middle income countries are not lawyers and medical doctors. So what we did was kind of code the occupations that where these returns to experience were lower and call that, group them as low quality self-employment in terms of learning. This doesn't mean that, lawyers don't learn as they work. This means that given the types of jobs that most self-employed people in low and middle income countries have and the type of jobs that wage workers have, the increase in learning as for every additional year of experience is higher if you are wage worker than self-employed. It has to do with, being in a firm, especially if you are in a larger firm, gives you, opportunities for learning from technology that are higher, opportunities to learning from peers and managers that are higher. So it's kind of a different context that leads you to, that creates conditions for, in the current jobs, not that you would have that anyway, always, but in the current jobs that you are observing more learning as in wage employment than in self-employment.
Okay, thank you. Christian, please, your question. Let's wait for the microphone to arrive.
Hi, I'm Christian. I'm also in the local economic development program. My question kind of relates back to what Juan Pedro and Carla mentioned in the beginning in terms of low income households. I'm just curious of how disaggregated that data is, because what I think is, looking at indicators such as low income, it's kind of multifaceted. So it's like a lot of factors play into that statistic. And I think it's like, what I'm thinking is like, I know you mentioned that two different scenarios are low income child in a low income neighborhood versus one in a high income neighborhood. And how, I guess in the qualitative lens, like looking at that statistic, there's some sort of exception in it. So I think my question is, does this statistic kind of factor in like a strong parental household where you have both parents involved within the life of the child, and whether that be also education, that social aspect of it?
Thank you, Christian. Here, the thought experiment was really to show the causal impact. So we were trying to keep fixed our thought experiment is, let's take two children who are observationally similar in terms of their social economic status, but let's see if they grow up in more affluent versus less affluent neighborhoods, how they do in terms of, income as adults, for example, or, years of schooling. So what we were trying to kind of control for and not make it drive our results was all the observable characteristics. We just had the observable to make the statement that they were similar a priori in terms of the income level of their family. But you're right that there are many other characteristics that matter, and some of them are not we cannot observe them in the data. We are using here administrative, the research was using administrative data. So in administrative data, you can observe the level of education, the occupation, you can observe the age, the gender, who lives with whom, but you cannot observe other things that matter for your upbringing. But here, our message was, in the beginning of the analysis, we're kind of showing you the importance of the care environment through these graphs that were showing you the gap and how the gap persisted. Here was, now let's neutralize kind of the effect of the homes, and let's see if the effect of the neighborhoods has a bite. That was the thought experiment, using people who moved across Brazil.
More questions? Yes, Greta, please.
My name is Greta. I'm also in the LED program. And through the presentation and with Andres' class and many other classes, we're talking about people and we're talking about places. And from the policymaker's perspective, what do you think is the best or most effective way to tackle these problems? People-based or place-based?
This is a very good question, provocative and good. What we are saying is that for outcomes that really matter to us, we often have to do the two things. So it's not a people or place. Look, my goal is to improve malnutrition or improve learning. And what I'm saying is that I have to operate to people, if you will, kind of, skilling programs, income support, and I have to operate through places, because if the factory continues to be polluting, I will have children sick no matter what I do in terms of people directly. So it's really saying people alone won't make it. We'll need people and places to operate together for some outcomes to materialize. It's kind of more like that.
Sam, please.
Hey, I'm Sam. I'm in the Master's in Innovation Policy, and my question is regarding technological integration into the workplace. And do you think that's more of a matter of procurement of technology and physically putting it into workplaces, or making sure that managers have the actual skills to implement technology? Because I'm thinking about use cases like one laptop per child, where they had the technology and the money and were able to put it in thousands of schools worldwide. But then when the laptops broke, or teachers didn't actually have the skills to teach the children how to use it. I mean, is this more of a people issue or a procurement issue?
That's a very important question. I was this morning in a conference on Business Europe, and we were speaking about the jump that we still didn't make between adopting a lot of innovations and translating them into productivity. I wouldn't call it procurement. So it's not buying the technology, it's not just getting the technology, but for it to transform itself into productivity, which is our ultimate goal, we need managers. We need definitely the intermediate managers. There's a big conversation now in economics, kind of saying that we might be underestimating the impact of AI because, for example, we have measurement issues because we many times ask intermediate managers, and they are the most skeptical. The studies show about this, the adoption and of technology, AI, I'm speaking.
Because they're fearful of their jobs. So.
Exactly, that as well. So definitely just procuring, if you will, the computer won't make you more productive. Is working with the computer, is the information flows being better in your firm, is the access to information that is relevant for your job, is the teamwork being easier in your job, that's made by technology, is the organization where you work changing structurally, is what brings in the productivity, no doubt.
Lucas, please. Over here.
Thank you. My name is Lucas, and I'm on the Urbanization and Development program. I was interested in the stat you showed, which was that in India, increasing female labor force participation would increase the GDP by 43%. And I was thinking, so that is, like you said, the number it can be debated, whatever, but there's a big potential impact that can have. Why? So my question is, in India and other countries that also have similar patterns of labor force participation, why has, given that there's such a significant potential impact, why hasn't more been done to do that? I mean, you mentioned social norms earlier slightly, but aside from that, is there anything else aside from social norms that's posing such a big barrier to doing this change? Is it political will? What else is there that is kind of posing such a barrier to changing that?
Thank you very much, Lucas. Some of the barriers are in the supply side, is women not supplying the employment kind of logic, and the others are in the demand side. Even if women supply the labor, they need to have jobs to go to. So in the supply side, you have the social norms, but you have also, safety in the commute to work. If I'm a woman and I cannot commute safely to work, I will not be able to go to work. If at work I feel harassed, I'm not going to go to work. And so, the safety is also important. If I'm a woman and have children, young children, I don't have no one to take care of them, and I don't have a good child care to leave them, so access to childcare, to services is important. I won't go to work without that. So there are constraints that, deter women from being able to supply, even there are barriers to their participation, to their supply of labor. And then there is the part on the demand. Even if I'm willing to participate and all of that is okay, I need the existence of jobs that I can work on. But even there, the news is good. In the analysis that we did for Brazil, for example, and for India, what we saw was that regions that were growing the most and where job creation was more significant, we also see bigger increases in labor force participation of women. So it's kind of saying that it seems to be the case that when there are job opportunities, women do increase their female labor force participation. So I think the bottom line is that we need to act on both, on eliminating these barriers to women participating by providing security conditions, services such as childcare, and also on the demand side, on having good firms, good jobs that then can employ them.
Okay, I'm going to take my advantage as a chair to ask a couple of questions. Using this privilege, I think it's you showed a very interesting graph at the beginning, how the performance of children at school was fundamentally determined by the level of education of the mother. And that was set up already in preschool, and it didn't change over time. So whether they lived they went to a better or worse school, in a better or worse neighborhood, and whether they had more access or less time to travel to school or more time to travel to school, that remained more or less stable. So the question is, to what extent do then additional policies at the neighborhood level, or even later in the workplace, make only a marginal difference to what is something that is determined very early in life?
That's a very interesting question. To the extent that half of your human capital is built at work and another half in education, you can still leave a lot in the table if you don't invest in these policies in the workplace. Now, for the neighborhoods, I think the neighborhood level action will affect, directly these outcomes, but will go a bit beyond that. It's kind of, you won't learn if you are sick, if you don't go to school because there are the police rallies, if there is violence. So it's zero in many cases if some conditions at the neighborhood level are not met. So whereas the gap was remaining, we still see that human capital improves through the life cycle. So the difference between those two groups was large and remained constant, but within each group you see improvement. And that's what we want to kind of still stimulate through the places and the workplace human capital formation. So each person, no matter their background and their initial disadvantage, can rise to their potential, even if the gap, is not fully corrected.
Okay, so second question, which is a bit related to the first, but also to Greta's position and question before. You presented a framework that is like God sent for many of the people here, including myself. So an integrated approach in which you intervene both in terms of investment, but in terms of institutions in different elements. So home, investment, so make sure that women have more access to education, but make sure that care matters, and that care is an important factor. The neighborhood, and the whole idea that you have to make sure that is not just about improving the neighborhoods, but making sure that there's less of, let's say, an influence of gang violence and other things. And then you go into the labor force and use the potential, the human capital, allowing women to participate in the labor force, making sure that now that women that are more trained than men, their talents are not wasted for not participating in the labor force, but also training gatekeepers that then through social capital can spread and improve the productivity of workers, even those that are not trained. And when you put all that together, you have a comprehensive package that would lead to a much greater impact of human capital on economic development, and in turn, economic development improving human capital. That's fantastic. But then I go and talk to my decision maker, and they say, if I were to be a decision maker, I'll say to you, Joana, what you're putting forward is very nice, but it's complicated, it's costly, and I don't have the time. I have an election in 3 years, and if I have to wait for my 3-year-old to become 25-year-old, I'm out of my job. So I would then ask you, you have to prioritize. What would be the single most important intervention that would you recommend to a self-interested decision maker like myself in order to have the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time with the lowest amount of resources, which is what I'm going to get asked.
This is very difficult.
I'm not sure that it's difficult, but it's...
Now, the way I'm gonna answer it is kind of in a time of scarcity. We should choose the ones that have the larger returns and the larger impact on your human capital. The evidence shows that interventions early in life have a large impact. You mentioned the example of homes and how important what happens in the beginning is, how defining it is. Childcare, for example. And we kind of said that it's kind of in a puzzle. Like if I don't do others, and the others depend on the specific neighborhood. So in some neighborhoods, it's not that I have to do all of them in all neighborhoods of the world. In some neighborhoods, I don't have gangs, I don't have pollution. What is my priority depends a lot in the country and in the context. We kind of give you the parameters, the things that affect your human capital, and then you see whether you're lagging or not in each of them, and you parameterize according to that. But your point was, human capital returns often materialize just in the long run, but I have to invest right now. And as a policymaker, I might have urgency in seeing results. And I think here we should be conscious of kind of the misallocation that generates this kind of the different time period between policymakers' horizon and returns to some of these investments. And what I saw working was really long-term commitments. Say in Peru, they made a long-term commitment of all the presidential candidates said, we have in 5 years, we'll decrease malnutrition by 5 percentage points in children below 5 years of age. And then what they target was that outcome. They didn't say, I'm just going to do program X. No, they said, I want to target that outcome. And then to target that outcome, they did a program that, you're right, that we have to simplify. We cannot do a hyper complicated program. I think the research goal is to understand what is the simplest form of these programs that works at scale. But we have to layer some of these interventions. So it's not that you're creating 20 programs. You're creating just a program that has, all these parts inside, all these layers inside. Because otherwise you have zero effect. And that's not also something that you would want. So in terms of priority, I prioritize higher returns. Investments early in life have higher returns because of the time you have to occur to have the returns for. And I would understand that it's important to target the outcome and see it like a puzzle. What are the minimum pieces of the puzzle that I need to have, the minimum complexity that I have to have for making things work? And in some dimensions, such as malnutrition, I think we know it. In others, like skill development, we still have a lot to learn.
I think you said something very important, which is in order to make this work, in order to improve human capital, this is not a partisan or party political decision. This is a societal public good, and it benefits all. So in order to do that, we also have to invest in institutions and making sure that there's a consensus across society and across decision makers in order to buy into a program that would deliver in the short, in the medium, and in the long run, better outcomes for society. Before I close, I forgot to ask Mercedes, do you have any questions from coming from online?
No, I was checking my laptop periodically, but we have no questions.
Okay, so I'm just going to thank you, Anna, for being here and giving such a very important. Keep on coming. Remember that we keep on having at the Cañada Blanca Center all these events. Next week, on Thursday, on the 26th, we have Beñat Bilbao, who is the representative of the European Commission in the UK for innovation. So we're going to be talking about innovation targets and innovation objectives and how can we improve innovation. And for those of you here or those of you online, remember you can follow us on our channels on either X or LinkedIn. Follow all the presentations that we have that are being put by Mercedes on YouTube, and just be attentive because there will be many other events to come. So thank you very much.